15 years ago, a boy accidentally killed his playmate. To avoid being discovered, he pushed the body into a crevice in the rocks. The next day, the police launched an investigation into Remy's disappearance, and the residents of the small town all volunteered to help search. Nick quietly hid behind the crowd, observing. As people got closer and closer to the crevice, Nick's breathing became rapid. Suddenly, a police officer announced that the search would be suspended due to the approaching darkness and would continue the next day. However, that very night, the small town was hit by a severe storm, causing flash floods and mudslides. The next day, the town was left in ruins, and the entire forest was destroyed. This meant that no one would go back in to search for Remy. 15 years later, Nick became a well-known doctor in the small town. He thought the incident would never be brought up again. However, as the government began to develop the forest, Nick realized that Remy's body could be discovered at any time. He quietly snuck into the forest and found the crevice, but before he could retrieve the body, he heard a construction vehicle approaching. Nick had no choice but to flee temporarily. The next day, what Nick feared most happened. A worker discovered Remy's body, and according to the autopsy results, he had been murdered. The police also extracted a hair that didn't belong to the deceased. Once the DNA was matched, the killer could be caught. However, there were no DNA records for the people in the small town, so the file could only be temporarily stored. This meant that as long as Nick didn't undergo a DNA test, he wouldn't be discovered. However, one day, his girlfriend told him that she was pregnant. Nick believed it couldn't be his, so the woman proposed to have a DNA test. To avoid being discovered by the police, he had no choice but to marry his girlfriend. Since his girlfriend was Remy's sister, Nick had to face Remy's parents after the wedding. Fear and guilt would accompany him for the rest of his life. In order to keep her daughter a virgin, the mother makes her daughter wear a tight-fitting bodice every day and also marks the knots of it. Even so, the woman still isn't reassured. She warns her daughter that she must never have any contact with men, otherwise she will face severe punishment. Faced with such a domineering mother, Lisa didn't even dare to attend physical education classes. Even in the sweltering summer heat, she had no choice but to wear thick clothing. On this day, Lisa finally mustered up her courage. She lifted her clothes to reveal the tight-fitting undergarments beneath. A girl looked at this scene in disbelief. Lisa begged the girl to help her take off the tight clothing because she desperately wanted to participate in the PE class. However, just as Lisa was happily playing, her mother was closely watching her every move. When the woman saw her daughter remove the tight undergarments, her expression instantly turned gloomy. She angrily threw down the lunchbox and ran into the school. Before Lisa could even react, the woman grabbed her and dragged her outside. Despite Lisa's constant pleas for her mother's forgiveness, the woman still threw her into the car. Then, after this incident, the woman became even more demanding. With her severe obsession with cleanliness, she wouldn't allow her daughter to have any stains whatsoever. Even when Lisa took a bath, there would be a maid specifically assigned to clean her, while the woman supervised from the side. Moreover, all of Lisa's underwear had to undergo high-temperature disinfection, with no hand contact throughout the entire process. The undergarments were then sterilized with ultraviolet light and once dried, sealed in plastic bags. After finishing her bath, Lisa had to be weighed, but when she saw the numbers on the screen, Lisa looked at her mother in horror. A man was horrified to find a steel wire suddenly appearing on the highway, firmly fixed on both sides of the road. At this moment, a group of young people on motorcycles were approaching rapidly. The man shouted loudly, trying to get them to stop, but to no avail. As the motorcade got closer and closer to the steel wire, the man attempted to pull out the fixed nail. However, despite his best efforts, the nail wouldn't budge an inch. They were completely unaware of the danger. Fortunately, at the last second, the man successfully pulled out the nail. Watching the motorcade rush past, the man finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, at this point, the leader of the motorcade suddenly received a phone call. Just as the man was wondering why they had stopped, a mysterious figure suddenly appeared on the side of the road. Immediately after, another steel wire stretched across the highway was pulled up. When he saw the motorcycles turn around, the man became nervous. He ran desperately, trying to stop them, but it was too late. They were extremely excited and completely ignored the man's warnings. The next second, tragedy struck. Seeing the terrible scene before his eyes, the man was terrified and stood there, not knowing what to do. However, this was just the beginning. The moment the man inserted the key into the lock, his wife was horrified to discover that his arm seemed to pass through an invisible door. Startled, the man quickly withdrew his arm. Next, the man tossed a tennis ball with their names written on it forward. They were shocked to see the tennis ball vanish, as if entering another space. But the ball quickly flew back. Lisa hurriedly removed the key. Even more incredibly, the tennis ball now had the words, "How do you know our names?" written on it. The man believed there might be another world behind the invisible door. Determined to find out, he inserted the key into the lock again, despite his wife's objections, and walked straight through. Seeing her husband disappear before her eyes, Lisa suddenly had a bad feeling. She anxiously waited outside. An hour passed, and her husband still hadn't returned. So she mustered her courage, approached the invisible door, and poked her upper body inside. Lisa was stunned to discover someone who looked exactly like her. She quickly retreated to the room. In a panic, Lisa removed the key, but thinking of her husband, she reinserted it. Several more months went by, and the man still hadn't returned. Lisa could no longer bear the lonely life. She found the key, then took a dagger and passed through the invisible door again. She saw her other self cooking. Lisa asked where her husband was. However, the woman wasn't terrified, as Lisa wasn't the first person to come here looking for her husband. The woman told her that each time the invisible door was opened, she would go to a different place, and there would be a couple identical to them. Lisa realized her husband might never return, so she had a bold idea. Lisa dragged the woman back to her original world, then used a rope to pull out the key. In this way, Lisa successfully replaced that woman, not knowing that they in other worlds had the same idea. The man seemed to have dug up something in the yard. He quickly brushed away the dirt on top and discovered that a huge wooden box was buried underneath. After hesitating for a moment, Jim lifted the wooden board. He was terrified by the sight before him. Mustering his courage, he took out a stack of banknotes from inside. He then returned to the house to check the authenticity of the banknotes. Incredibly, they were all genuine. The next day, Jim took out all the money from the box. After counting, he found there was a total of more than $3 million. He put all the banknotes in the storeroom. At night, Jim was suddenly awakened by a sound outside. He took a baseball bat and quietly went downstairs. But after a thorough check, he did not find anything unusual. Jim thought he might be too nervous, so he prepared to have a cup of coffee. However, just then, there was another sound coming from outside the house. Jim carried his coffee and went outside.
Goddamn cats!
Back inside, he opened the storeroom to check. Only after ensuring there were no problems did he feel relieved enough to go to sleep. But just as he turned off the lights, Jim was horrified to see the old man from the box appearing outside the window. He came to the yard in a panic, but he did not find any trace of the old man. Still uneasy, he decided to lift the wooden board to check. Jim saw the old man still lying there, which made him much more relaxed. The next morning, when Jim woke up, he found that his hands were covered in mud, and so were his feet. But strangely, he couldn't remember how he got back to bed. He felt dazed and confused all day, as if he had not woken up. After returning home from work, he found many footprints on the floor by the door. Jim took off his shoes to compare with the footprints on the floor, but found they were not his own footprints. He quickly opened the storeroom to check. Fortunately, the banknotes were still there, but at night, he heard movement outside the house again. A figure was slowly approaching the house.